The story opens with a scene of stark isolation, the kind that only the Old West could provide. A dusty trail stretches endlessly under a blazing sun, and at its farthest point, a lone figure appears, an exhausted black woman. Her clothes worn and travel-stained, her eyes heavy with fatigue and sorrow. She has been on the run, fleeing not just the harshness of frontier life, but the more personal chains of a cruel guardian who sought to control her future. Her arrival at the stage stop is not celebrated. It is noted with suspicion and curiosity by those who inhabit this remote town. The stage stop itself is a rough collection of sun-bleached wooden structures, their surfaces cracked and warped from years of exposure. A single water trough sits in front of the main building, a few horses tied loosely to weathered posts. The wind carries dust and the faint aroma of hay, horse sweat, and smoke from distant chimneys. It is here that the woman first encounters the weight of judgment and scrutiny that will follow her throughout the story. Her presence in the town is immediately noticed, but not in a welcoming way. Locals exchange sideways glances, whisper under their breath, and some even stop their conversations entirely to watch her pass. The atmosphere is heavy with suspicion, a subtle warning that this town is unaccustomed to outsiders and perhaps even less accustomed to women who travel alone. Her internal state mirrors the harsh landscape. She is weary, physically and emotionally, yet beneath that exhaustion is a quiet strength. She knows she must maintain her composure, for any display of vulnerability could be misinterpreted as weakness or invite further gossip. Her journey has been fraught with peril, both natural and social, harsh weather, treacherous terrain, and the constant anxiety of being pursued by those who would force her into an unwanted life. This combination of external and internal struggle sets the stage for the tension that will drive the narrative forward. From the moment she steps off her horse, the townspeople begin to observe her, forming unspoken judgments about her character and past. Some imagine scandal, some pity her, and others openly speculate about her circumstances. These first impressions are a crucial narrative tool, establishing the societal pressures she faces as a woman in the Old West, particularly a black woman who must navigate both racial and gender prejudices. The whispers, though subtle at first, will grow louder as the story progresses, reflecting the harsh and often unforgiving social codes of frontier life. Amid this tension, small details bring her character vividly to life. The way she grips the reins tightly, the careful way she avoids stepping into the dustiest paths, the brief pause she takes to scan her surroundings for any sign of danger or kindness. These actions reveal her resilience, resourcefulness, and intelligence, qualities that will become essential as the narrative unfolds. Her entrance at the stage stop is not merely a physical arrival. It is a declaration of her independence, her refusal to be entirely defined by others' expectations or to surrender to fear, even in a hostile environment. The scene also subtly foreshadows the arrival of the cowboy who will later become her protector and love interest. While she navigates the stage stop's uncertain reception, the story hints that someone outside the gossiping crowd will observe her with a different perspective, someone who sees her strength rather than her vulnerability. This first part establishes both the physical and emotional landscapes of the story. A town quick to judge, a woman forced to navigate suspicion and isolation, and the beginnings of a narrative that will challenge both societal norms and personal fears. In essence, Part 1 immerses the reader in the harsh reality of frontier life while presenting a protagonist whose courage and dignity immediately demand attention. The stage is set for tension, conflict, and eventual romance, all born from a moment as simple yet profound as a woman arriving alone at a small, dusty stage stop. As the woman settles at the stage stop, weary from her long journey, she quickly realizes that arrival does not bring peace. Instead, it brings a different kind of challenge, the subtle, cutting power of whispered judgment. From the corners of the dusty town, Eyes follow her every move. She senses it even before anyone speaks. Furtive glances, barely concealed smirks, the quick exchange of knowing looks between townsfolk. In the Old West, where survival depended on reputation as much as on strength or skill, gossip could be as dangerous as an outlaw's gun. Here, it becomes her first real adversary. The whispers start almost innocuously, soft murmurs carried on the dry wind. "Who is she?" one voice asks under its breath. "Didn't she come from the east?" another speculates. Soon, speculation turns to judgment. "She looks like trouble. I heard her guardian had to chase her down." The townspeople's imaginations run wild, painting her as vulnerable, scandalous, perhaps morally compromised. Their words, though quiet, are sharp, slicing through the fragile calm she tries to maintain. Each whispered comment echoes in her mind, growing louder, transforming into a chorus of accusation that threatens her sense of safety. The woman's reaction is layered. She does not flee or confront. She cannot afford to. Her face is composed, but inside, tension coils like a spring. Each glance feels like an invasion. She understands that, in a small town, everyone's business becomes everyone else's gossip. And being a lone black woman only magnifies the scrutiny. Prejudices and assumptions swirl invisibly around her, and she can feel their weight pressing down like the relentless sun overhead. Every step she takes, every slight movement of her hands, is watched and analyzed. The subtle body language of the townsfolk, the way they lean in, whisper, or avert their eyes, becomes a constant reminder of the social battlefield she must navigate. Gossip is not only about idle chatter. It is a test of her strength and resourcefulness. She must maintain her dignity and composure in the face of baseless speculation, a skill that has been honed over years of navigating a world that too often judges women by appearance and circumstance rather than character. At the same time, the townspeople's whispers reveal cracks in the social structure of the frontier, a society quick to ostracize and condemn, especially those who do not conform to rigid norms. Their assumptions about her morality, intentions, and even her potential pregnancy are projections of their own fears and prejudices. The whispers are cruel, yet they also serve as a narrative tool, emphasizing the woman's vulnerability and highlighting the courage she will need to assert her autonomy. Amid this tension, the stage stop itself mirrors the unease in the air. Horses shift nervously in their ties, the wind rattles shutters, and dust swirls around the edges of buildings as if the town itself is conspiring to unsettle her. These environmental details intensify the reader's perception of threat, amplifying the social pressure she faces. Every small act, touching her hair, adjusting her coat, reaching for a water bottle, is scrutinized, a minor gesture that could fuel more rumors. Yet, even in this oppressive environment, hints of her resilience emerge. She moves deliberately, keeps her gaze steady, and refuses to let the gossip unnerve her outwardly. The tension between her inner turmoil and outward composure makes her a compelling protagonist, drawing the reader into her struggle. It is through this crucible of rumor and judgment that the story begins to define her character. Courageous, intelligent, and determined to survive the harshness of both frontier life and social scrutiny. Part 2 lays the groundwork for the conflicts to come. Gossip, as seemingly minor as it may appear, sets the stage for the woman's later interactions with the townspeople and, crucially, for the entrance of the cowboy, the figure who will challenge the town as assumptions and offer her protection. The whispers are not just background noise. They are the first obstacle she must navigate, a reminder that in this world, courage is often measured not by confrontation, but by endurance and poise. The day after her uneasy arrival, the town's gossip has settled into a steady hum, low, poisonous, and ever-present. The woman, determined to maintain her composure, spends the morning sitting outside the stage stop, her travel bag beside her boots. waiting for a stagecoach that may not come for days. The air is dry and sharp, the kind that cracks lips and tests patience. The town, though small, feels immense in its judgment, every doorway concealing a pair of eyes. And just when she begins to feel the edges of despair closing in, a low rumble begins to roll across the plains -HOOFBEATS from the horizon. Dust rises like a golden storm, and through it emerges a solitary rider. A cowboy. The image is striking sunlight flashing against the silver buckle at his chest, his shadow long and dark against the earth. He rides with an easy confidence, the kind that suggests years of solitude and danger have shaped him. His horse moves like an extension of himself, steady, powerful, deliberate. To the townsfolk, he's a familiar but unsettling presence. A man who belongs to no one, who comes and goes as he pleases, guided by his own silent code. To her, however, he is a mystery, a figure who seems carved from the very wildness that both terrifies and tempts her. When he dismounts at the watering trough, the town seems to hold its breath. The cowboy nods politely at a few faces but speaks to no one. His voice, when he finally breaks the silence, is low and even, the kind that commands attention without effort. "Mornin'," he says simply, to no one in particular, yet somehow his eyes find hers. That single moment of eye contact is enough to unsettle her carefully maintained calm. There's something in his gaze, not pity, not curiosity, but recognition. He sees her in a way no one else has, not as gossip or spectacle, but as a human being who's endured. The cowboy hears the whispers, too. They swirl around him like gnats, townsfolk trying to poison his mind before he's even spoken to her. "She's trouble," one mutters near the saloon. "Ain't right, her travelin' alone," another adds. But the cowboy's face doesn't change. He has long learned that truth rarely lives in rumor. As he tends to his horse, he watches her quietly, noting her posture tense but proud, like someone standing guard over their own soul. There's a flicker of respect in his expression, though he says nothing of it. When he finally approaches her, the moment feels suspended between time and instinct. "You look like you've been ridden hard," he says, tipping his hat. She hesitates before answering, uncertain whether kindness is ever genuine in this town. "Long road behind me," she replies softly, her voice carrying both weariness and strength. That exchange brief, cautious, and heavy with subtext marks the story's first emotional spark. The cowboy's presence subtly shifts the town's energy. The same people who whispered now glance between the two, curiosity mixing with fear. He is not a man they cross lightly. His reputation for justice and quiet defiance precedes him. Though he says little, his actions have always spoken louder than most men's boasts. The woman senses this, though she doesn't yet understand why his appearance unsettles her heart as much as it eases her fear. By evening, the sky burns red with sunset. The cowboy sits outside the saloon, a glass untouched in front of him, while the woman quietly eats her meal near the stage stop porch. There's a silent thread between them, something unspoken yet deeply felt. Neither knows the other's story yet, but in that silence, an understanding forms. Part 3 closes with a quiet revelation. That salvation sometimes arrives not with grand promises or declarations, but in the steady gaze of someone who sees you when the rest of the world looks away. The cowboy's entrance marks a shift in tone, from isolation to connection, from suspicion to the first stirrings of hope. The woman doesn't know it yet, but her story has just found its turning point, the moment when a stranger's quiet strength begins to challenge an entire town's cruelty. Days pass, and the woman's quiet presence continues to stir the town's uneasy heart. The gossip that once floated on whispers now hardens into accusation. Each day she endures it silently, drawing her shawl tighter around her shoulders as if the fabric could shield her from the weight of their words. But peace, fragile as it is, shatters when a wagon rolls into town one fateful afternoon. Her guardian's wagon. The sound of its wheels grating against the hard-packed road freezes the woman in place. She knows that sound. The man who steps down from the wagon is not a stranger. He is the one she fled from. The man who tried to barter her life for profit and convenience. He's tall, sharply dressed in the way of someone who values appearances above decency, his hat casting a shadow over eyes that hold no warmth. His arrival brings the town to a standstill. Curious faces appear in windows, doorways fill with onlookers, and in seconds, the stage stop becomes a stage for humiliation. "Miss Evelyn," he calls, his voice slick with false civility. "You've caused me quite the trouble, running away from your obligations. But we can settle this today." His words drip with arrogance. From his coat pocket, he withdraws a folded document, the marriage papers. The town murmurs. A few gasp. He waves them like a banner of triumph. "Signed and sealed," he declares. "By law, you're promised. Best you stop pretending otherwise." Evelyn's face drains of color. She feels the world tilt around her, the heat of the sun, the sting of dust, the burn of humiliation. Every eye in the town is on her, watching this confrontation unfold like a cruel spectacle. She shakes her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't force me. I never agreed to this." Her guardian smirks, his voice rising so all can hear. "Your consent isn't needed, girl. You're a ward, not a woman of choice." The words slice through her resolve, echoing with the venom of every unjust law and prejudice she's ever faced. Around her, the crowd shifts uncomfortably, but no one steps forward. The silence of bystanders is a second betrayal. Then, from the edge of the crowd, boots sound against the dirt, slow, deliberate, steady. The cowboy steps forward. His face is shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, but his stance radiates calm defiance. "She said she didn't agree," he says evenly. "That makes those papers worth less than dust." The guardian turns, sizing him up with disdain. "This isn't your concern, cowboy. I'll thank you not to meddle in legal matters." The cowboy's eyes narrow. "Law is one thing," he replies, voice low and dangerous. "Decency's another." The crowd stirs. People exchange looks. They know what happens when this man draws a line. Evelyn feels her heart race. She wants to speak, to protest, but her voice fails. The cowboy steps closer, his hand brushing the edge of the document. "You think you can own her with paper?" he asks. Before the guardian can respond, the cowboy snatches the marriage papers and, without hesitation, tears them clean in half, then again and again, until they flutter to the ground like broken promises. The silence that follows is electric. Dust swirls at their feet. The guardian's face turns red with fury. "You'll regret that," he spits. The cowboy meets his gaze, unflinching. "No, sir," he says, his tone final. "You will." Evelyn stands frozen, torn between disbelief and relief. For the first time in years, someone has stood up for her, not from pity, not from gain, but from principle. Around them, the crowd remains silent, their judgment momentarily replaced by awe. The cowboy tips his hat to her, a gesture of quiet respect, then turns his back on the man who thought he could decide her fate. In that moment, everything shifts. The whispers that once condemned her now falter. The man who claimed ownership is exposed, and the woman who was once voiceless finds the faint stirrings of power returning to her heart. The moment hangs suspended, as if the world itself holds its breath. Torn shreds of paper drift through the dusty air, glinting in the late afternoon sun like tiny, fluttering ghosts. The marriage papers, the symbol of her captivity, now lie scattered across the ground, trampled beneath boot heels. For the first time since she arrived, the woman, Evelyn, feels something she hasn't in a long while, the trembling start of freedom. The cowboy stands tall in the center of the road, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes, but his presence radiates calm power. Around him, the townsfolk stare in stunned silence. They had seen this man face outlaws, ranch thieves, and lawmen alike, but never had he defied society's rules so openly. To challenge a man's claim over a woman was to invite scandal, perhaps violence. Yet he does it without hesitation, his jaw set with quiet conviction. Evelyn's guardian recovers from his shock, his face twisting with anger. "You've made a mistake, cowboy," he hisses. "You'll pay for this." That paper was legal. The cowboy steps forward, boots crunching on dry earth. "Legal doesn't make it right," he says, voice steady as a drawn gun. "You can't buy or force a woman's will, not while I'm standing here." The words ripple through the onlookers like a spark catching kindling. Some avert their eyes. Others look at Evelyn with something that almost resembles respect. The sheriff, leaning on a post nearby, shifts uneasily but says nothing. He knows better than to cross the cowboy, a man whose justice runs deeper than written law. Evelyn feels her pulse hammering. For years, she has dreamed of someone saying those words aloud, of someone seeing her as more than a burden or a possession. Yet now that it's happening, she doesn't know what to do with the weight of it. Gratitude, disbelief, and fear swirl inside her. What will the consequences be? Her guardian sneers. "You think you're some kind of hero?" He spits. "You don't even know her. You'll regret meddling in things that aren't yours." The cowboy's eyes flash with restrained fury. "She's not a thing," he says, voice rising just enough to cut through the murmurs. "And she ain't yours, not now. Not ever." The crowd gasps at the audacity of it, a public declaration that shatters the unspoken code of ownership that governs the town's men. For a heartbeat, it seems the guardian might reach for the pistol at his hip. The cowboy's hand drifts subtly toward his own, the motion smooth, practiced, unhurried. The tension is razor-thin. Then, perhaps sensing the danger, the guardian spits in the dirt and storms off, swearing vengeance under his breath. When the dust settles, the cowboy turns to Evelyn. His expression softens, the steel in his gaze giving way to something quieter, compassion. "You all right, ma'am?" he asks. She nods, though her throat tightens with emotion. "You didn't have to do that," she murmurs. He studies her for a long moment before answering. "Maybe not," he says, "but I reckon someone should have done it a long time ago." There is no grand gesture, no flourish. Just truth, raw and simple. That's how he is, a man who doesn't speak more than needed, but every word carries weight. The crowd slowly disperses, whispers rising once more, but now their tone has changed. Some speak of scandal, others of courage. Whatever they say, one fact is undeniable. Something powerful has shifted. Evelyn looks down at the torn papers scattered at her feet, then back at the cowboy. She sees not just defiance in him, but a strange kind of safety. He has risked his reputation, perhaps even his life for her. It's not love yet, not quite, but something like faith, fragile and fierce, has taken root between them. As the sun sinks low behind the hills, painting the sky in blood and gold, Evelyn finally exhales. The chains that bound her, ink on paper, fear in her heart, have been broken. And though the road ahead will not be easy, she knows one thing for certain: she is no longer alone. Evening settles over the frontier like a heavy quilt, warm and dim. The town has begun to quiet, but the echoes of what happened earlier still hang thick in the air. Inside the saloon, voices buzz in low disbelief. The cowboy's defiance has already turned into legend. Some call him reckless. Others call him honorable. But out beyond the main street, where lanterns burn low and cicadas hum in the sagebrush, Evelyn sits alone on the steps of the stage stop, feeling the slow unraveling of the day's storm. The air is cool now, carrying the scent of horses and dry wood. She can still feel the ghost of fear inside her chest, but over it lies something steadier, the strange calm that comes after a storm when you realize you've survived. Yet as the last light fades, she becomes aware of another truth. She has nowhere to go. The stagecoach she was waiting for is days away, maybe longer. Her guardian will not stop searching. She's too exposed here, too vulnerable under the open sky. It's then she hears the slow, familiar rhythm of boots against dirt. The cowboy approaches quietly, his hat low, his stride steady. He doesn't speak right away. He never does. Instead, he leans against the post beside her, the silence between them soft but not awkward. He is giving her space to breathe, the kind of courtesy no one else in her life has ever offered. "You can't stay here," he finally says, voice low, almost gentle. "Too many eyes. Too many mouths." She nods, understanding but uncertain. "I've got nowhere else to go," she admits, her voice barely above the hum of the wind. He studies her for a moment before responding. "My place is a few miles out past the creek. It's quiet there. Folks know better than to come around uninvited." She looks up sharply, wary. "You'd take me in? Just like that?" He doesn't flinch. "Ain't charity. It's decency." Then, after a pause, his tone softens. "And I figure you've had enough of men making decisions for you. You can choose for yourself." The offer sits between them like a fragile bird, uncertain, delicate, and full of risk. For a moment, she says nothing. The town's lights flicker behind them, and she realizes that staying means enduring more whispers, more danger. Going with him, however, means stepping into the unknown. But then she remembers the way he tore up those marriage papers without hesitation. That act of quiet rebellion still burns in her mind, not because of the drama of it, but because it was the first time someone had stood beside her rather than above her. "All right," she says finally, her voice steady. "I'll go." The cowboy nods once, like he expected her answer all along. "We leave at first light," he says simply, and with that, the decision is sealed. That night, Evelyn sleeps lightly in a small room above the stage stop, her mind restless with what tomorrow might bring. The moonlight spills across the wooden floorboards, and she finds herself thinking of him, of his quiet strength, his unspoken kindness. In her dreams, she sees dust trails and open skies, and for the first time in years, the thought of tomorrow doesn't fill her with dread. At dawn, he's waiting by his horse, a second Mari saddled for her. When she steps outside, the morning light paints everything gold. He helps her mount, his touch careful, respectful. No words pass between them. None are needed. The world feels vast and new as they ride out together, leaving the gossip, the judgment, and the remnants of her old life behind. The path ahead is uncertain, but for Evelyn, it's the first road she's ever taken by choice. The cowboy rides beside her in silence, his presence solid and sure, a reminder that sometimes safety isn't found in walls or laws, but in the quiet promise of a man who means what he says. And so begins a fragile peace. Not yet love, not yet salvation, but something close enough to both. The days that follow are quieter, but no less tense. Out at the cowboy's cabin, miles beyond the reach of town, Evelyn finally breathes without fear of every whisper cutting her name. The cabin is simple, a single room built of weathered pine, a small porch overlooking the endless stretch of prairie grass. Inside, everything speaks of solitude and self-reliance, a sturdy table, a worn saddle by the door, a rifle resting on the mantel, and a single flower in a chipped cup, a small attempt at beauty in a harsh world that the cowboy, whose name she learns is Caleb, speaks little, but when he does, his words are measured and kind. He makes sure she eats, that she rests, that she feels no pressure to explain the pieces of her past she isn't ready to share. He treats her as an equal, not a burden. And slowly, the silence between them shifts. What once felt heavy now feels safe. But peace on the frontier never lasts long. Back in town, tongues have begun to wag once more. The story of the torn marriage papers has already turned into something more scandalous. Some say the cowboy carried her off. Others whisper that she's expecting, that the pregnancy was the reason for her guardian's anger. It doesn't matter that none of it's true in a place where rumor travels faster than wind. Truth is always the first casualty. At the trading post one afternoon, a ranch hand mutters to the sheriff. They say she's with child. The sheriff frowns but doesn't answer. By the next day, the story is everywhere: in the saloon, at the blacksmith's forge, among the women hanging laundry on the line. She's with child, they whisper, voices laced with moral judgment and morbid fascination. Some pity her. Others sneer. Back at the cabin, Evelyn senses the shift before she hears the words. On her trip into town for supplies, she feels the weight of new stares. Where once there was curiosity, now there is quiet condemnation. A few women turn their faces away. One older man tips his hat with a smirk that makes her skin crawl. When she returns to the cabin, her hands tremble as she sets down her basket. Caleb notices immediately. Something happen? He asks, his tone gentle but edged with concern. She hesitates, then forces out the truth. They're saying things, she murmurs. About me, about U.S. He studies her for a long moment, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. What things? That I'm with child, she whispers, her voice breaking. That I ran because of shame. That you? That you're... I know, he interrupts softly. He doesn't need her to finish. For a heartbeat, she's afraid he'll turn cold or distant, that even he might doubt her. But Caleb steps closer instead, his voice low and steady. You listen to me, he says. Let 'em talk. Folks'll always need someone to point at so they don't have to look at themselves. Don't let their poison take hold. Evelyn's eyes well with tears, not of weakness, but of exhaustion. She's fought too long, endured too much to let words break her now, but still, they hurt. Caleb reaches out, not to comfort her like a child, but to offer a silent promise. His calloused hand hovers near hers before he lets it rest lightly, respectfully, atop her fingers. I don't care what they say, he tells her, voice rough. You've got nothing to prove to anyone. You've done nothing wrong. His words, simple as they are, sink deep. For Evelyn, they're not just reassurance, they're redemption. For years she's been measured by lies and expectations. Now, for the first time, someone gives her the dignity of truth. As night falls, the prairie hums with crickets and the fire crackles softly. She sits by the hearth, lost in thought, while Caleb mends a saddle in the corner. The silence between them is full of trust, of something unspoken that feels dangerously close to love. Outside, the rumors continue to spread like wildfire. But inside that small cabin, far from the judgmental eyes of the world, a quiet understanding grows stronger than any whisper. The morning light breaks soft and gold across the prairie, but peace is far from the horizon. By now, the rumors have ripened into something ugly, heavy with lies. She's with child, they whisper. It's his? The story has grown legs, galloping through the town like wildfire in dry grass. Every retelling twists the truth a little further until, in the mouths of the cruel, it becomes something obscene. When Evelyn rides into town with Caleb that morning, needing flour, candles, and medicine, the gossip takes physical form. Conversations halt. Doors half close. Even the sound of boots scuffing along the wooden walkway feels charged. The pair walk side by side down the main street, and for the first time, she doesn't lower her head. Her chin is lifted, her eyes steady. But inside, Shame prickles her skin like heat from a branding iron dot at the general store. Mrs. Kettle, a large, talkative woman with a sharp tongue, can't resist her moment. As Evelyn collects her supplies, the woman leans forward over the counter and says loud enough for everyone to hear, "I heard congratulations are in order." The words hang in the air like gun smoke. Evelyn freezes, her hands tightening around the sack of flour. Caleb looks up from where he's standing by the door, his gaze narrowing. "Beg pardon?" he says evenly. Mrs. Kettle's smile is brittle, her voice dripping false sweetness. "Well, they say she's expecting. And if that's true, I reckon everyone knows who's responsible." Her eyes dart between them, gleaming with satisfaction, a predator scenting weakness. The store falls silent. A few townsfolk linger near the shelves, pretending to browse but listening intently. Evelyn feels the heat of humiliation rise to her cheeks. Every word she wants to say burns in her throat, but won't come out. Then Caleb moves. He doesn't raise his voice or draw his weapon. He simply steps forward, the floorboards creaking under his boots. The weight of his presence is enough to pull every gaze toward him. He takes off his hat, revealing eyes that burn not with anger, but with something fiercer, resolve. "If she carries," he says, his voice low and steady, "it's mine." The words hit like thunder. No hesitation, no shame, just truth spoken with the clarity of a man who's already decided where he stands. For a heartbeat, no one moves. Even the wind outside seems to pause. Evelyn's breath catches in her chest. The room feels charged, every heartbeat echoing in the silence. Mrs. Kettle's smirk falters, her color draining as the weight of his words settles over her. Caleb continues, his tone cutting through the room like a blade. "You folks got nothing better to do than tear down an innocent woman. That's your burden to carry. But if you're looking to throw stones, you throw 'em at me. Leave her name out your mouths." His gaze sweeps across the room, not angry, but unyielding. There's a gravity to him, the kind that commands respect without asking for it. Even the men who once muttered about him at the saloon avert their eyes. Evelyn stands beside him, stunned. The words he's spoken aren't about ownership or scandal. They're a shield, a public promise. In one sentence, he has stripped the town's gossip of its power and turned its venom back on itself, outside. As they leave the store, she struggles to find her voice. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispers, her tone trembling between gratitude and disbelief. He places his hat back on his head, glancing at her with a faint, wry smile. "Maybe not. But I don't take kindly to lies or cowards hiding behind them." They walk together down the dusty street, side by side, while whispers follow them like shadows. But this time, the whispers sound different, softer, uncertain. The declaration has shifted something in the air, something permanent, and as they ride back toward the quiet safety of the plains, Evelyn looks over at him, her heart full of conflicting emotion, shock, gratitude, and something deeper, something dangerously close to love. For the first time, the whispers don't scare her, because now, when they say she's with child, there's a man in this world willing to answer, "If she carries, it's mine." For days after Caleb's declaration, the town sits in a strange, uneasy silence. Rumors don't die easily on the frontier, but even gossip needs air to breathe, and Caleb's words had taken that air clean away. The same people who once whispered behind Evelyn's back now keep their distance, unsure whether to pity her, fear him, or admire the quiet strength in their union. Out on the open plains, time moves differently. Days stretch long beneath the blazing sun, and nights hum with the steady rhythm of crickets and coyotes. In the calm that follows the storm, Evelyn begins to heal, not just from the wounds left by words, but from the years of being unseen. She spends her mornings tending the small patch of earth behind the cabin, coaxing life from stubborn soil. Her hands, once trembling with fear, now move steady and sure. Each sprout that breaks through the dirt feels like a small miracle, fragile but alive. Caleb builds her a wooden fence around the garden, saying nothing as he works, but his silence is full of meaning. It's the kind of silence that says, "You belong here now." Inside, they fall into a rhythm, two lives that once stood apart learning how to move in tandem. She cooks while he mends tack or carves wood by the fire. They don't speak much, but the quiet between them feels safe, as though words might only cheapen what's already understood. Sometimes he reads to her in the evenings, his rough voice tracing the lines of a tattered Bible or an old novel left behind by a traveler. Other times she hums soft hymns while he listens, head bowed, eyes closed. It's not romance in the way storybooks tell it. There are no grand gestures or stolen kisses beneath the stars. But there is something truer, the slow, steady stitching together of two broken lives. Still, the world beyond the cabin doesn't stay silent forever. One afternoon, a wagon approaches the homestead. The sheriff steps down, hat in hand. Behind him rides Reverend Taylor, the town preacher. Evelyn stiffens at the sight, old fear flaring back to life. Caleb steps out first, his body a wall between her and whatever news they bring. The sheriff clears his throat. "Ain't here to stir trouble," he says, glancing awkwardly between them. "Just thought you both ought to know. Folks stop talking. Most figure they got it wrong." The Reverend nods. "Sometimes truth takes longer to travel than lies. I'd like to offer my apologies, Miss Evelyn. The town owes you better than what it gave." Her eyes brim with tears, not of sorrow this time, but of release. For so long she's carried the weight of others' judgment, and now, for the first time, it begins to lift. Caleb doesn't speak, only places a steady hand on her shoulder, grounding her in that moment. After they ride away, Evelyn stands in the doorway of the cabin, watching the horizon fade to gold. The prairie wind brushes her cheek, soft as a blessing. "I never thought I'd see the day they'd stop talking," she murmurs. Caleb chuckles low. "They'll find something else soon enough. Folks always do. But you just keep living." That night, as the fire crackles and the sky fills with stars, Evelyn finds herself smiling. It's a small smile, but real, a flicker of hope she no longer feels guilty for holding. She realizes healing isn't about forgetting what's been done, but about learning to live beyond it. When she glances at Caleb, she sees not just the man who defended her, but the one who taught her what dignity sounds like spoken aloud. And though neither of them says it, both know something has changed between them. In a world that once turned its back, they've built something quiet, honest, and unbreakable. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn doesn't feel like a rumor. She feels like a woman who finally belongs to herself, to her peace, and perhaps, in time, to him. Winter comes slow to the prairie, creeping first across the grasslands, then settling heavy in the hills. Frost laces the cabin windows each morning, and the air smells of pine smoke and promise. For Evelyn, the change in season feels like a reckoning, a quiet reminder that even in the harshest cold, life can begin again. It's been months since the whispers died, but she still remembers them, how they once defined her, how they nearly broke her. Now they echo only faintly, like a ghost that no longer has power. Out here, away from the noise of judgment, she has found something she never thought possible: peace. Each day unfolds with the same gentle rhythm. Caleb rises before dawn, his boots soft against the floorboards, and tends to the horses. Evelyn wakes to the sound of his voice, low, steady, humming some half-remembered tune as he works. She makes coffee strong enough to warm the bones, and by the time he returns, the cabin is filled with its comforting scent. They've built a life that isn't grand but is theirs. She tends her small garden, even in the cold months, coaxing herbs to grow in wooden boxes near the hearth. He repairs fences, hunts when needed, and brings her small tokens, a wildflower when spring threatens early, a polished stone from the river. Each gesture speaks volumes in the language they've built between them. But love, when it comes, doesn't arrive all at once. It unfolds like sunrise, soft, deliberate, unhurried. One evening, as snow begins to fall, Evelyn stands by the fire, watching flakes gather on the window. Caleb sits at the table, mending a torn glove. "You ever think about leaving here?" She asks quietly, not looking at him. He doesn't answer right away. "Used to," he admits. "But not anymore." She turns then, her eyes catching the firelight. "Why not?" He looks up, meets her gaze. "Ain't nothing out there I'm looking for," he says simply. "Everything I need's already here." The words settle in her chest, soft and heavy all at once. She wants to say something, to tell him what it means to be seen, to be chosen after a lifetime of being cast aside, but her throat closes around the words. Instead, she steps closer, takes the glove from his hands, and places her fingers over his dot for a long moment. They stand in silence, two souls stitched together not by passion's fire, but by something steadier, truer. Understanding Dot later that night, as they sit side by side before the hearth, the firelight flickering over their faces, Evelyn finds her courage. "You saved me," she says softly. Caleb shakes his head. "No, ma'am. You saved yourself. I just gave you space to remember how." She smiles at that, a small, knowing smile that feels like sunlight after years of rain. Her heart, once wrapped in fear, opens at last. Dot, and when she reaches for his hand, he doesn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwine, and it feels less like a beginning and more like coming home. Outside, the wind howls across the plains, carrying the memory of every whisper that ever tried to destroy her. But inside the cabin, there is only warmth, the crackle of the fire, the quiet strength of two people who found redemption not through the world's approval, but through each other's grace. In the spring, when the wildflowers bloom again, travelers passing by the old stage route sometimes stop and speak of a woman and a cowboy who live out on the ridge. They say she's the one who was once whispered about, the one who bore the shame of the town and turned it into something stronger. They say she's with child. One might still whisper, smiling faintly. But if she carries, it's his in every way that matters. And maybe, in that moment, the whispers aren't cruel anymore. Maybe they're just a story retold, a legend of love born from defiance, healed by honesty, and carried forward by two hearts that refuse to break. Because sometimes redemption doesn't arrive with a miracle. Sometimes it's just a cowboy, a woman, and a cabin full of light, standing as proof that love, once found, can silence even the loudest of lies.